Lesson 4.3, Writing Equations in Point-Slope Form. The essential question is, how do you write an equation in point-slope form? Point-slope form is our third different form that we're learning about that works for equations. We, in Chapter 3, talked about standard form, and then in Chapter 3 and 4, we talked about slope-intercept form. So point-slope is the third one. Point-slope looks like this. Y minus y1 equals m times x minus x1 in parentheses. The letter m is the slope. So that's the same as what we use in slope-intercept form. And then the x1 and y1, think about when we use our slope formula, the x1, y1 are the point that's on the line. So basically what we're doing is we're teaching you another way to write an equation for your line when you're given the slope and one point that's on the line. So you don't have to use slope-intercept form, you can use point-slope form instead. All right, our first example. Write an equation in point-slope form for the line, then graph it. The slope is 1/4 and it passes through the point 3, -2. Here's my point-slope form that we're working with. The slope is m, and the point on the line is x1 and y1. So when we fill these in, the first y stays. So I'm going to have y minus my y1, so that's the y coordinate from my point. It was -2. That's equal to my slope 1/4 times, in parentheses, x minus my x1, x coordinate from the point is 3. So in blue, I'm showing you the x and y that will remain in our equation. They remain in our equation. So the first y and the first x, they stay. Those are the variables for our equation. Now to simplify this, the first y minus -2, I can turn that into a chunky plus. So I'm actually going to have y plus 2 equals 1/4, and then in parentheses x minus 3. This is my answer. This is my answer. This is my equation written in point-slope form. It doesn't look very nice and neat. It still has parentheses. It still has a fraction. So it's just a different form, So it might take a little getting used to because it's not as nice and neat as slope-intercept form is. So let's talk about how we can graph this. We know how to graph the point 3, -2. So I'm going to graph that point 3, -2 right here. So to the right 3, down 2. We know how to use the slope. If the slope is 1/4, I'm going to rise 1. Remember our rise, up, down, and then I'm going to run 4. So rise 1, run 4, puts me over here. I don't want to keep going to the right because I'll run off of my graph. So I'm going to reverse that process, and instead of going up 1 and over 4 to the right, I am going to go down 1 and back 4 to the left to get my third point, and then draw my line, just like that. Example number 2, very similar to the first one. Start out with your point-slope form. This is on your MCA test in 8th grade. They give you all of the forms, so standard, point-slope, and slope-intercept, and the slope formula. Those are all on your MCA, so you will have those for your quizzes and tests in our class. Okay, my slope is m, and my x coordinates are x1, and my y coordinate, y1. Now I can plug these in. Remember, the first y and the first x stay in our equation. So y minus y1 is 1, my slope -6, x minus -2. So the only simplifying again is a chunky plus. You can rewrite it if you want it to look a little bit neater and just make it x plus 2. So the minuses in the formula, if you subtract a negative number, it's going to turn into a positive. To graph this one, -2, 1, left 2, up 1, and then my slope is -6. So I'm going to put a 1 under it so that it looks like a fraction. So rise -6 means down 6. And then run 1, so over 1 to the right. Down 6, I don't have room again, so I'm going to instead go up 6 and then back 1. So this is a very steep negative slope, and I kind of missed a little bit with my line. There you go. Next one. So example number 3, point slope form. My slope is m and x1, y1. Keep the first y, keep the first x. So y minus y1 is 0. My slope, -3/2, x minus -2. When I simplify this one, I've got my chunky plus, and I also know that I don't have to write y minus 0. I can simply write y equals. I don't have to include it if it's a 0. So there's my point slope form. My graph, start at -2, 0, so that would be left 2. And then use the slope, -3 over 2. Rise over run. So I'm going to go down 3 over 2 to the right. Down 3 over 2 to the right. And draw my line. This next one, it says write the equation in slope-intercept form. So now what we're going to work on is we're going to work on taking point slope form and turning it into slope-intercept form. Because all three of the forms, standard, point slope, and slope-intercept, they're like interchangeable. You can change from one form to the other. And depending on the type of problem you're solving, they may tell you which form to use, or you may find one form is more useful than the other. So to get this in slope-intercept form, my answer has to be solved for y, because slope-intercept, of course, is y equals mx plus b. So my y is almost by itself on the left-hand side. It just has a +7 with it, so I need to subtract that 7 on both sides. Notice on the right-hand side, I didn't write it underneath the x, I wrote it underneath the -2. -2 minus 7 is the same as -2 plus -7, or -9. So I'm just going to simplify it as x minus 9. So y equals x minus 9. That is slope-intercept form. So that's my answer. On this next one, there's a little bit more to it. To get this one in slope-intercept form, I see parentheses on the right-hand side, which are common in point slope form. So I'm going to have to use my distributive property and multiply. Multiply both of these things in the parentheses by -3. So -3 times x is just -3x. -3 times -4 is +12. Make sure that you be careful with your signs. Now, on the left-hand side, to get the y all by itself, my second step is to subtract that 6. So y equals -3x. And this would be +6, because a +12 plus a negative 6, or positive 12 minus 6 is 6. So there's my answer in slope-intercept form. Another one like that. Again, distribute first. When you see parentheses and a number outside of them, make sure you distribute. 5 times x is 5x, plus 5 times 1 is 5. So y minus 3 equals 5x plus 5. The second step, add 3 to get the y by itself. So y equals 5x plus 8. This problem we already solved, so we do not need to solve it again. Oh, here we go, a fraction. All right, 3 halves. We need to distribute 3 halves, so y plus 1 equals 3 halves x, and 3 halves times negative 4, I'm going to put a 1 under it, negative 4 over 1, I can either multiply straight across, or I could cross reduce, cross cancel. So I'm going to reduce this by dividing both of them by 2. So now if I multiply straight across, I'm going to get negative 6. Negative 6. Last step, subtract my 1. So y equals 3 halves x minus 7. Negative 6 minus 1 is negative 7. This is a click and drag that reviews standard form, slope-intercept form, and point-slope form. So if you could do this at home, it would be nice, but you cannot. So this one is point-slope form. So is this one, and this one, and this one. Standard form, you may or may not remember, standard form, A, B, and C are integers, but A has to be positive. There we go. And then slope-intercept form, y equals, so the only thing on the left-hand side is the y. There you go. You can write a summary now. And then here are your homework problems. They kind of skip around. Make sure you read the directions to see which ones you are required to graph on, because some of them ask you to graph.